Brief history of drug use. For thousands of years, humans have used various types of drugs and other intoxicating substances. For example, the consumption of wine was tracked from the early Egyptians. Narcotics was used by as early as 4000 BC, and the use of marijuana in China for medicinal purposes can be traced to as far back as 2737 BC. However, it was not until the 19th century AD when the active substances in drugs were extracted for human consumption. This period was followed by newly found substances including laudanum, morphine, and cocaine, all of which were completely unregulated and freely prescribed by physicians for various ailments. They were available as patent medicines and sold by traveling salesmen in drugstores or by mail. During the American Civil War, morphine was freely used, such that wounded veterans returned home with their morphine kits and hypodermic needles. With the influx of these soldiers coming home, opium dens flourished around the same time, and by the early 1900s, there were an estimated 250,000 drug addicts in the United States alone. Several years afterwards, problems related to addiction were eventually recognized. For example, legal protection measures against drug abuse in the United States were first established in 1875, the year when opium dens were finally outlawed in San Francisco, California. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 required that patent medicines containing opium and certain other drugs be labeled accurately. This was also the first national drug law implemented in the United States. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotic Act prohibited selling large doses of opiates or cocaine, except by pharmacists and licensed doctors. By the 1930s, most U.S. states mandated the inclusion of anti-drug education programs in all public schools. However, due to lingering fears that knowledge would lead to experimentation, this initiative was discontinued in most places. After the repeal of prohibition, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, then known as the U.S. Federal Bureau of Narcotics, began a campaign to present marijuana to the public as a highly addictive substance. A decade later, the social upheaval of the 1960s in the U.S. saw a dramatic increase in drug use and some degree of increased social acceptance. In fact, by the early 1970s, many states and localities had lowered drinking ages and even decriminalized marijuana in some places. When the 1980s came, there was a decline in the use of these drugs, but only to be replaced by other more powerful drugs such as cocaine and crack. Then in 1995, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration began to regulate, and the emergence of the fetal alcohol syndrome raised alarms and resulted in the placement of warning labels to alcohol products. Around the same time, the addictive nature of prescription drugs such as Valium and even coffee also came to light, thus placing them under public scrutiny. The illicit drug routes are common routes taken by manufacturers to transport illicit drugs. These routes are described as the Golden Triangle and the Golden Crescent. The Golden Triangle has a size of approximately 950,000 square kilometers, which overlaps the mountain ranges of three Southeast Asia countries, namely Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar. Along with Afghanistan in the Golden Crescent, the so-called Golden Triangle is widely considered one of the most extensive opium-producing areas in the world since the 1950s. In fact, until the early 21st century, majority of the world's heroin was produced in the Golden Triangle. The Golden Crescent is another area in Asia where illicit opium production takes place. This area is primarily located at the crossroads of Western, South, and Central Asia and overlaps three countries, namely Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. The mountainous peripheries of these three countries constitute the so-called Crescent. However, of the three, only Pakistan and Afghanistan are opium producers, while Iran serves as a transshipment route for these smuggled opiates, aside from being a consumer of such illegal drugs.